Brilliant. Well, welcome everybody to our lunchtime lecture here today. We've still got a few participants joining, so I'll do a bit of an extended introduction so that we've got everyone joined in time to see this amazing talk we've got coming up here today. My name's Jeff Stryker. I'm a curator at the Natural History Museum, and I'm also editor-in-chief at the Zoological Journal of Linnean Society. I want to thank you all for taking time to join us. As you know, Linnean Society covers a wide range of different topics around the natural world. With what I do with the journals, just to mention quickly, we publish several different topics of academic research. So if you're in that field, please do keep in mind that our journals are a great outlet for a lot of original research, reviews, and opinion pieces, and where editors are always more than happy to answer questions if you have any prior to submission. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. I'm delighted that we're joined by Dr. Leah Grayston Smith, who studied zoology at University of Reading, after which she attended Oxford Brookes University, which I had the privilege of being able to go visit a few weeks ago. Lovely campus, very nice. And then she headed back to Reading to complete her PhD, where she focused on, in part, the topic of what she'll be talking to us about today, which is hogs on film, urban hedgehog citizen science. And before I hand over to Leah, I'll just remind everybody that there will be time for questions and answers at the end of today's presentation. Please avoid using the hand raising option. We will have time for questions at the end, and we'll try to get through as many as we possibly can. But with that, I'd like to thank Leah for joining us today, and over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so basically, what I study at the moment is the impacts of anthropogenic feeding on hedgehogs. So, looking at all aspects to do with hedgehog behavior, their ecology, what they're doing in their environment, and how they're interacting with their environment. And just in case anybody doesn't know, the word anthropogenic just simply means something that's either provided by or caused by humans. So, I'm looking at the impacts that humans are having on hedgehogs in their environment and how hedgehogs are responding to those. And part of that involves this citizen science project, Hogs on Film, which I set up a couple of years back, and I'll talk you through. So, first thing first, what is a hedgehog? Seems quite basic, bit of a weird question to ask, but hedgehogs are what we call a highly derived animal. This really means that they've got loads of unique features that makes them quite unique. There's no other mammals in our kind of ecology that looks like this in the UK. There's no other mammals that really act like this. And some of these features that make it so unique are the fact that they're nocturnal, they're insectivorous, they're solitary species, they're non-territorial, they're nest builders, and they hibernate throughout the winter. Now, back in the kind of 1950s to 1980s, we had lots of really good quality research done on them. So most of the time, people were going around following them, observing their behaviors, and categorizing what they were doing and how they were responding in natural environments and in kind of semi-natural environments. So they were observing them out in rural areas or in places like open parks and gardens or golf courses. So these are big, wide open spaces. Now, we don't tend to find them so much in those spaces, and that brings me on to why I've been studying them. So, when they were studied previously, they were kind of found widespread across the UK, and this was a range of rural and urban areas. So, we used to find them across hedgerows, broadleaf woodland, particularly where the edge of broadleaf woodland meets fields and arable land, across grassland and farmland, and then in towns and cities. But kind of in post-war Britain in the kind of 1945s and onwards, our agricultural practice really intensified. Hedgerows were removed from a lot of field margins, and the use of kind of pesticides, herbicides, and industrialized kind of farming really changed our landscape, and it's made our rural environments a lot less attractive, particularly for nest building species. And obviously, when we're looking at a hedgehog, it's a nest building species and it needs leaves to build its nest. If we remove our hedgerows, there aren't any leaves in order for it to build its nest. So what we're finding is they're less apparently located in rural areas, and now they're more common and their populations are stable or growing in towns and cities, which is good for us. So what about their diet? What do they eat? Now, previous research involved either fecal analysis or stomach content analysis. And this is looking at the kind of leftover material in their stomach or in their poo. And you're trying to identify the species and the items that you find by looking at the leftover parts. Now, this was really great research when it was done, but it does have limitations. So, as I mentioned, we're looking at the leftover parts. We're not necessarily looking at what was digested. And also, when you're looking at stomach contents or fecal analysis, you're looking at a really short-term window of consumption. So, maybe you're looking at what that animal ate in the last 6 hours. More recently, we've got other kind of technology available now. So now we can use DNA analysis and molecular analysis. But again, this still is looking at that short-term window of consumption. So we're only getting information about what that animal is eating maybe that day. Some of the research that I'm doing in the lab is looking at long-term diet patterns, and this is a methodology called stable isotope analysis. So I'm looking at their long-term patterns in consumption and how that's changed from when they were living in rural environments compared to urban environments. And it's kind of complementary to the project that I'm doing where I'm asking people what they're feeding their hedgehogs. So, all that research done on hedgehog feeding, what do they eat then? What's on the menu? So, they are insectivores, which means that their main diet is formed of insects and invertebrates. So, we have things like beetles, caterpillars, fly larvae, in particular, things like crane fly larvae is really popular for hedgehogs. They will also eat slugs and snails and worms. So mainly it's invertebrate prey on the menu, but they will also consume vertebrate prey when they're given a chance. So things like bird eggs, chicks and fledglings. They also will eat roadkill and carrion, and they'll eat other kind of small vertebrate prey like things like frogs and toads. So we do know that in this country they are in decline. And as I mentioned before, their decline is more apparent in rural areas. So we're seeing the populations kind of shifting from rural to urban areas, but overall there is a big decline across the UK. So this really warrants the reason behind us all kind of studying them and working together and figuring out what's causing this population decline and what we can do to mitigate against it. So I started up my project Hogs on Film to collect a lot of data from people that are already filming and feeding hedgehogs in their garden. So, as I mentioned before, we had a lot of good research that was done between the 1950s and the 1980s. And then I noticed that there's kind of a gap in the literature from the 80s to kind of modern day, where we didn't have a lot of new ecological studies going on, and we were kind of relying on that data before. But hedgehogs are not living in those areas, so their behavior is likely to be different now than it was before. So I kind of set this project up to collect data from people that are already filming and feeding hedgehogs. So they're using their technology to watch hedgehog behavior in their garden. And this is like kind of harnessing that data, collecting it all, turning it into a format that us conservationists can use to then address any issues and look for patterns in their behavior. So basically, anyone who films and feeds a hedgehog, all they do is they go online to our website platform, they can upload their film footage, and they complete a short survey telling me what the hedgehog was doing in their garden, how it was behaving, what they fed their hedgehog, things like that. And the data that I've got in this study comes from our first 16 months of recording data. So we got lots more now, but this is our initial set of data that we collected that I'm going to talk you through. So the main aims of the project are to investigate, firstly, how do hedgehogs behave in and around a garden feeding station? Is this different to how our past research showed they behaved in a natural or a semi-natural environment? To understand the kind of species dynamics that are occurring in our gardens. So our gardens are filled with wild animals and domestic animals, and we want to understand what kind of dynamics are happening there to build up data on the types of food that are being provided. These are all novel types of foods, and we don't have any data at the moment on the quality, the content, and the implications of these kind of foods. And then to identify potential risk areas so that we can try and work towards addressing them together. So, first point first, what is the hedgehog's behavior like around a garden feeding station? So, unsurprisingly, the most widely reported hedgehog behavior is feeding. Hedgehogs are coming into our garden to eat. But we have been witnessing hedgehogs coming into our garden in kind of twos and more than two. As you can see in this photo, we've got eight here, which is very strange for what was reported to be a solitary species. So, although they're coming into our garden to feed, we're getting them coming in numbers that we didn't record them coming to places in the wild before, which is very interesting. So, it suggests they're changing their behavior towards each other when they're coming into our garden spaces. Despite the fact that we had a higher number of hedgehogs appearing in our garden than we would in the wild, they did prefer to eat alone. So they would often come at set times in the night and try and avoid each other still. So apart from feeding, we had lots and lots of hedgehogs coming in for drinking, but we've also been recording a lot of other really interesting behavior. We've got people who've seen them foraging, we've seen courtship behavior, we've seen grooming and some of their strange behavior like self-anointing. And then I found that when I was looking through the comments that people would submit with their surveys, a lot of the time people were saying things like, there was huffing and puffing going on, or there was a hedgehog argy-bargy, or there was definitely an argument because there was loads of noise. So I then decided to add in these really hedgehog-specific categories of pushing, shoving, and huffing and snorting. So that was our last month of data collection last year. I added those in just because the amount of times we had people saying there was so much noise coming from them. And again, this is quite interesting, keeping an eye on the different kind of vocalizations that are happening. So moving on to the next point then, what kind of species dynamics were occurring in our gardens? Now, in about two-thirds of instances, we had non-target species coming into our garden. So when people are providing food for hedgehogs, that's their target species. They want to attract hedgehogs and they're trying to feed hedgehogs. But then all these non-target animals might come and benefit from the food as well. And that's exactly what we found. So we had a really great amount of animals coming into our garden. We had 7,251 animals in our gardens that we recorded over this time. Most of them were hedgehogs, but as you can see, we also recorded a really high number of slugs. Now, this is a minimum count of our slugs, and you might be thinking, why on earth was I recording slugs? Because they're very small animals. You might think that they're not very important. But actually, slugs play quite a unique role in hedgehog ecology because they can be a prey source and they can also be a source of potential parasite transmission. So I wanted to keep an eye on how our slugs are reacting to the presence of this anthropogenic food. And not surprisingly, we had lots of other visitors to our gardens as well. Loads of cats coming about, rats and mice. We had more mice than rats. Lots of lovely foxes as well. Birds tended to come either in the dusk or the dawn hours and pick away at any leftover food. And we also had some other day active creatures like squirrels and dogs, which would usually kind of nose around in the daytime. But then we had some interesting other species coming in as well. And they were things like voles and shrews. And we also had a polecat sighting as well. So that's really amazing. And let's not forget, we had one toad last year as well, eating from our feeding stations. So here's a nice picture that we've got some of our friends visiting our feeding stations, all these lovely foxes who would come at the same time or different time to hedgehogs and get along absolutely fine. We've got a muntjac that we saw earlier this year. We have a badger as well. This year was our first badger and hedgehog in the same garden. And may I just add, no one got hurt. It was absolutely fine. And then we've got our little mice up there and our birds. So, despite the fact that we had all this different range of creatures coming into our garden, just like the hedgehogs, they did prefer to eat at different times. So, in around kind of two-thirds of instances, they either arrived at a different time to the hedgehogs or people were not sure. So, moving on to the next point, what about the different types of food that are being provided? Now, food is something that I'm really quite passionate about. Our nutrition is really key to our well-being. If we eat something that doesn't agree us, we're likely to be a bit cranky, we might be bad-tempered, it plays an impact in our health, our well-being, our longevity, and also our behavior. And this is something that I've been studying quite closely. So, firstly, I wanted to find out what type of food people are feeding their hedgehogs. 54% are giving them what's branded as cat food, and 42% are giving what's branded as hedgehog foods, whilst a smaller amount of people are giving things like dog food, ferret food, and then other foods that could be considered as human food, like chicken, pork pate. We had beef suet as well. So these might have been people who had things lying around that they thought that they'd give to their hedgehogs as well. You might be surprised that actually, at my last count on the market in the UK, you could buy 42 different distinct brands of hedgehog food. Um, this is very interesting because, I mean, firstly, the wide variety is amazing, but also the kind of legislation that surrounds hedgehog feeding is not the same as that which surrounds feeding of our domestic animals. So when we're buying a cat or dog food, that's got legislation saying it has to meet minimum standards. So it has to have certain amounts of nutrients in it. It has to have certain proportions of amino acids, for example, in it. None of that legislation protects the feeding of wild animals. So hedgehogs really kind of sit in this grey area where we're providing them food, but the food hasn't been tested for quality and hasn't got any standards maintaining it. Um, so it's really important when you're looking at a hedgehog food to try and think of it quite critically. They have got really attractive packaging. That packaging is designed to make you buy it. So don't always be taken in by the smiling pictures of hedgehogs. Have quite a good look at the ingredients and make sure what you're seeing on the ingredients are things that have got less cereals in it and less plant-based ingredients in it, and no nuts and seeds, because our insectivorous hedgehogs don't eat those and aren't adapted to eat those kind of foods. So moving on, what kind of risks have we identified about these hedgehogs coming into our gardens? So I mentioned slugs earlier. The reason why I wanted to keep a track of slugs is because they're a really important transmitter of the parasite Crenosoma striatum. Now, this parasite causes an infection called lungworm. So the parasite will start off its life cycle in a slug or a snail. The slug or snail will become really heavily infected. If that hedgehog then eats it or comes into really close contact with it, it can then become unwell. Now, a normal healthy hedgehog will have a number of parasites that it's carrying at any time, and it will have internal parasites and it will have external parasites, and it will cope with them absolutely fine and maintain these kind of levels of parasites absolutely fine. It's a normal part of hedgehog ecology. And whilst it's important that we don't go out and try and over clean the environment, we just want to keep track of how slugs are coming around our food bowl because it could mean that this is an increased risk of parasite transmission. And obviously, we want to work to keep that down. Moves me on to my next point about hygiene as well. So, another question I asked my participants is if they found any poo in or around the feeding station. And we found that in 1/3 of instances, hedgehogs would poo either in the bowl, in the feeding station, or within a meter of the feeding station. Again, so if a hedgehog's coming in and it's unwell, and if it's pooing everywhere, this could quite quickly end up being a hotspot for parasite transmission. It's really simple. The way to avoid this is just to clean everything, bring it in with soapy warm water. It's so simple, but people tend to forget when they're putting things in their garden. They think it's out in the elements, it'll rain, it'll be clean. But just like you would with your cat or dog, you really need to kind of maintain cleaning standards when you're feeding another animal. So another risk that we identified is aggression. Now, out of 171, out of all our surveys, we only had 101 instances where our hedgehogs were interacting with each other. But in those 101 interactions, 18 of them were aggressive. So that's quite high numbers. That's about 18% of them were aggressive, and that's towards each other. So again, when a hedgehog's coming into our garden, the dynamics, the physical dynamics of the garden are going to set it up for an aggressive interaction. You've got walls and you've got boundaries, which are kind of making the animal feel kind of locked in. You might have a feeding station that's only got one entrance. So if an animal's in there and another one comes in, it's likely to respond in an aggressive or a defensive way. And there are ways that we can reduce this. So considering putting feeding stations that have multiple entrances and exits, or feeding with a kind of open kind of feeding station, which hasn't got an enclosed area. Or you could even try scatter feeding. If you just feed handfuls of food across the garden, then it means that the animals aren't kind of coming into one area and they're also engaging in foraging behavior. So it can be quite good for that intellectual stimulation as well. So there are ways that we can reduce aggression between hedgehogs. But what about aggression between different species? So obviously I said there's lots of different animals coming into our garden. And actually we found that aggression between species was a lot lower than aggression between hedgehogs. So we had 6 incidences of aggression between species, which involved a hedgehog. Two was a rat biting the hedgehog. The third was when that hedgehog finally got annoyed and barged that rat back. We had one incident where a hedgehog was sat in a food bowl in a spiky ball whilst a cat and a fox squabbled over the food, and the cat won. And we had one time when a hedgehog ate a slug on camera, and then we had one fox attack on a hedgehog. But you don't need to worry about this as well. The fox grabbed the hedgehog, it quickly dropped it and ran away because it had spikes in its mouth. The hedgehog uncurled and walked off unscathed. So again, although we've got all these animals coming in, the risk between animals fighting each other seems to be a lot lower than the risk we have with hedgehogs fighting each other. But our gardens don't just pose those risks. There are a load of other hazards that are present in our garden, and we really need to be mindful that whether we're intending to feed and support animals, animals might be coming into our space. So we get entanglements from football nets and garden netting, plastic, choking hazards from plastic, and entanglement. We've seen hedgehogs which have got strimmer and lawnmower injuries, toxicity from poisons and pesticides. It's really horrible, the kind of range of things that can happen when an animal's in our space. And we need to be mindful that we're lowering those risks and keeping them hazards at bay. So, just briefly, I want to mention as well, there are some other interesting ways that us feeding hedgehogs are impacting their kind of physiological responses. So, we know that hedgehogs are hibernators, but some new research has actually shown that by us providing a source of food that doesn't kind of deplete year round, we're actually impacting this hibernation behavior. And also having artificial lighting is helping this as well. So the increased photo period that the artificial lighting provides, and then the fact that the food source is present year round, is actually stopping our hedgehogs from going into hibernation. Or often we're finding they're going in for shorter periods of time and then they're coming back out again, which is interesting that they're responding like this. And how will this continue as climate change and other things happen? So, why does it all matter? Why am I keeping track of all these things? Why does it matter? I just want to draw you back to our kind of first point about all those features that make a hedgehog a hedgehog. So we said that hedgehogs are nocturnal, they're nest builders, they're insectivorous, solitary, non-territorial, and they hibernate throughout winter. This is what research shown them to be. This is what research identified them as. But in our gardens, they're not being insectivorous because they're feeding on diets that aren't made of insects. They're not coming in and acting solitary. Like they're coming in groups and twos and more. When they're coming around a food bowl, we're seeing that they're being territorial. They're starting to show some of those dominance behaviors. So they're changing their behavior. And we said that they hibernate throughout winter, but do they hibernate throughout winter? Or is the impact of our lighting and our food changing that as well? So we're kind of left over with just the fact that they're nocturnal and nest builders, but how long will that stay for? We don't know. So I've got a little bit of our footage here, so you can have a little look at just some of the things that our participants are capturing. So here we can see just how important it is to have more than one entrance and exit in a feeding station. You know, we've got one hedgehog that was eating happily here, and this hungry one's come in. So this one doesn't want to share the food bowl. It's able to quickly kind of escape unscathed. Water is a really crucial element in your garden. And if anyone out there is thinking, how can they attract hedgehogs, I would suggest putting in a pond. Now, this is some very commonly seen hedgehog behavior. I like to call it hedgehog bowling. So again, they don't like to share their spaces and they'll quite often bowl over a kind of potential competitor. This behavior looks quite aggressive or intimidating, but actually what you're seeing is the courtship ritual of hedgehogs. So the female tends to kind of back away whilst the male will approach and he'll kind of circle her until she kind of submits or runs away. And some people will mistake it for aggressive behavior. It does look intimidating to me, so it's an easy one to kind of miss. Here we can see it from another angle. So you can see really well that the female is there being circled by the male as he kind of goes round and round in circles. He'll also make a lot of sounds when he's doing this, so make all those huffing and puffing sounds. Um, I don't think you've got audio on this footage, but if you go to our social media, you can hear some of it. And here we have a male who seems to have struck lucky, but he won't let his date finish her meal. So again, our participants are recording some really interesting behaviors. They're seeing more than just feeding. They're seeing behaviors that, people would have to follow hedgehogs for a very long time in the past in order to get a sight of hedgehog courtship ritual, let alone seeing them mating with each other. So it really shows the value of utilizing citizen science data and collecting all that footage that people are collecting every night and bringing it somewhere, keeping a track of that kind of rich data that we're collecting. Awesome. So that's the end of my talk then. This is where you can find us. We're all across social media. We've got an Instagram, a Facebook, a YouTube channel, which is new, and we've got our website platform. Right now we're taking a break because the hedgehogs are gone into hibernation. So what we do in the hibernation period is we look through all the data we've collected from this year and we do all our stats. When it hits March again next year, what we'll do is we'll invite people to go back onto our website platform and send in their videos and complete their surveys, and we'll just collect more data from them. But if you are interested in the project or if you know anyone who's interested, then please follow us, keep a track of what we're doing on social media, keep up to date with it, share it. We are a non-profit, so everything we do is voluntary and it really, really helps get the word out there. We want as many people as possible taking part so we can really capture what's going on in our gardens and compare it to what we know from the past. Awesome. So that's it for today. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Leah. We now have the Q&A open. I have many questions myself, but I'll hold off until we get through a few from the audience. I guess we'll get right into it. So here's the first question for you. I'm a volunteer for Wild Chiswick. We are creating hedgehog highways between resident gardens in West London. Should we encourage residents to feed any hedgehogs that visit their gardens after we have created an entrance, or should we let the hedgehogs rely on natural resources?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question, and this is one that often comes up. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd just encourage hedgehogs to forage for their own food. When they're feeding naturally, they're going to eat a real range of invertebrates, so they're not feeding from just one particular group. So they're getting a really good balanced diet, whereas the kind of food that we're providing for them isn't necessarily balanced, and they might be eating just more from one group. We don't really understand the impacts of the kind of nutrients and the nutritional value that we're providing in our diet. So, whereas it is, if you do want hedgehogs to stay in the area, feeding them is the way to do that, to encourage them to stay. It's also important, and if you can, encourage those people who have got hedgehogs in their garden to do things like increase the biodiversity in their garden. So if they haven't got a pond, put in a pond. If they haven't got many plants, put in some plants, because that will encourage all those invertebrates and all those other species that the hedgehogs kind of thrive on.
Brilliant. Next up, Isabel Whitfield has said, fantastic talk, thanks.
Thank you.
Then the next question from Sharon is, if we are still getting footage throughout the winter, do you still want it sent in?
So you can still send your videos. All you do is go straight to our website, hogsonfilm.co.uk, and if you just follow the prompts on there, there'll be a big button that says upload a video. You can continue to do that throughout the winter. So if you are still getting Hedgehog's visit, you can go at any point and you can upload a video. What we usually do is during their active period, so from March to November during the active period at the first week of each month is when we hold a study week. So that's when we encourage people to submit their data so that we've got most of our data is submitted during the same time period. And then it makes it easy to compare it like across the country.
Cool. The questions are rolling in now. Uh,
Okay.
okay, the next one up is it better for hedgehogs if my garden is cut back or overgrown?
Yeah, this again is an interesting question. There's kind of there's benefits both ways and there's hindrances both ways as well. If you have a more overgrown garden, you're probably going to have better invertebrate diversity. And because that kind of structural diversity is going to create all those micro habitats that different animals prefer. So, like some butterflies need bare ground, some of them need long plants, for example. So, you're going to need different varieties of structures in your garden to encourage all those invertebrates. But long grass can also harbor ticks. So, again, you get sometimes other species that could be detrimental living in those areas. So it's best to kind of, if you can, have a range of different structures. So you can have an area where the grass is kept low, and then you can have areas where it's kept longer, or you've got wildflowers and things like that, log piles, all those things like that, open compost heaps. That's all perfect because it will create all these little microhabitats which will encourage those invertebrates in and provide different structures and places for a hedgehog to build its nest. Because also, as well as them hibernating in the winter, they need to build nests each day to sleep in. So it'll give them
Mm.
places for them to go to sleep as well.
Great. Next up from Sharon, I am a rehabber and sometimes I release in my garden if they have nowhere suitable from the finders. Would footage of released rehabbed hedgehogs be of use?
Yeah, yeah, that's excellent. Basically any hedgehog footage. We're just looking specifically at urban hedgehogs, so that's the only thing. But any hedgehogs in any gardens, that's the data that's lacking in the research. So that's really where we want to collect all this data on their behavior. So whether they're rehabbed or they've been wandering around for a while, they're going to be more used to being around humans, so their behavior is likely to be different. And that's what we want to kind of collect.
We've got another behavioral question here. There are times, this is from Sarah, there are times when hedgehogs seem to tolerate others well, eating together in twos and threes. Why are they not fighting? Are they family groups that stay together?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell, and it is really strange. There has been some research done by some of my colleagues over in Europe showing that actually have personalities. So it could be to do with the fact that maybe they're just more tolerant of each other. Maybe they are family members. Maybe they're all females, for example, at that time. Because we do see it tends to be maybe animals that aren't related to each other, or maybe they're males, for example, being more territorial. We don't really know is the answer, but sometimes they tolerate each other and sometimes they don't. It's so strange, and it's interesting to observe how different they can be towards each other.
Yeah, great, thank you. Another Sarah has now asked, how long do hogs usually hibernate for? How long are hedgehogs hibernating for now? Do you see much variation in hibernation time in the citizen science data?
Yeah, so traditionally, or back in the kind of the 50s to 80s, when we had all that really good quality research done on hedgehogs, their hibernation period would start in November and it would go all the way through to March. Now, we know that during the hibernation period, they will kind of periodically come up and down. So they'll come semi out of hibernation for maybe a day whilst they move nests, and then they'll go back into hibernation. So that's what was normally seen. Maybe 2 or 3 times during that period, they would rouse, move to a different nest spot, and then they would go back into hibernation. But what we're seeing now is it's a kind of a combination of everything. We've got a shift in climate. Our Novembers now are like incredibly mild compared to how they were, 30, 40 years ago. So now, whereas in November they should be in hibernation, they're not, they're staying out of hibernation and they're going in a bit later. So we are seeing that they're going in later, and because the winter is mild, they don't have to maintain that period of hibernation for as long. They might rouse more often. We've had a lot of research done. There was some done at Liverpool University where they found that out of the 5 hedgehogs they tracked through the winter, I think only one didn't go in hibernation at all whatsoever. It stayed awake the whole time. And it's quite interesting to keep an eye on because obviously underneath a hedgehog's spines, it has no fur, it's just got bare skin. So it can lose a lot of heat through its back. And if they're starting to evolve so that they don't go into hibernation because they've got food, so why should they hibernate? It could create all kinds of different changes with their physiological responses because then if a freak snow comes down and they're not prepared for it and they're going to lose a lot of heat through their body. So it's just something that a lot of research has been tracking this change in hibernation behavior, and it is showing that it is a fact now. They are changing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, physiological tolerance is such an important thing to think about with climate change, with changing temperatures and shifting climate regimes. Next up, we've got a multi-part question, it looks like from Les. If we don't use specific hedgehog food, is dog or cat food better? And then the second part, how do you minimize rats? Also, they say, nice talk, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so good question again. So, and I wish I could give you a straightforward answer, but the answer is we don't really know. Um, As I mentioned before, so dogs and cats are domestic species, which means that the food that we sell for them here has to have been tested and it has to meet minimum standards and meet those regulations. So if you are feeding a hedgehog dog or cat food, it has met some minimum standards and regulations, but those are standards that are set out by observing changes in dogs and cats. We don't have any long-term feeding studies on hedgehogs. So like where when you buy puppy food, that's been tested on puppies. We know what puppies need for that stage of their growth. We know what kind of nutrients they need. We don't have any data like that on hedgehogs, for example. So we don't know what nutrients they need at what stage of their development. We don't know how they will respond to being given certain things. A lot of cat food and dog food as well is quite heavily filled with kind of filler ingredients. You see a lot of plant-based materials in there. Hedgehogs really aren't evolved to eat plants whatsoever. They get their fiber from chitin, and chitin comes from the exoskeletons of invertebrates. So they get their fiber through that, whereas we and dogs get their fiber through cellulose-based fibers. So we get our fiber through plants. They don't have a digestive system which is evolved to eat plants at all. So you can give them dog and cat food. Try and make sure it's got no cereals in it and grains and things like that. But again, we just don't have the research on the long-term impacts of feeding them meat instead of inverts. And this might actually impact them down the line. So try to feed, if you can, feed them something that's got inverts in it. Don't opt for something that's just one species of invert. That's the problem when people feed mealworms. It'll be just one species of invert there, so you've got an imbalanced diet still. But hopefully, soon in the coming kind of year, I should have more research for you to kind of guide you on the nutritional aspects of feeding hedgehogs. In regards to deterring rats, that's quite a tricky one as well. Basically, when you're putting food in your garden, it's an open buffet, and animals
Sure.
are going to come in there. If you want to feed one species of animal, you have to be prepared that you might be feeding others that you don't want to feed. But some people have said that planting mint or certain herbs can help to deter rats. They don't like certain scents. Definitely do not use a poison or a trap or things like that because any poison or any traps that a rat can get in, a hedgehog can also get into as well. So it's best to kind of try natural methods to deter them, but unfortunately, there's not kind of a cure-all for that.
Yeah. Great. So Sarah Garcia has a couple of questions here. When taking care of our gardens, what kinds of plants and setups will be better for these species? Are some plants more beneficial to provide shelter and food? Also, what care will disturb less these species? So I think it's about, yeah, plants. What are there ideal plants for providing shelter?
So in the wild, the best plants for hedgehogs and the ones that we find hedgehogs most closely associated with are actually brambles. So when they're building their nests, they like to have something that provides some structure and also some predation control. So if you can allow an area of your garden to have brambles and or roses, thorns, shrubs like that that are really quite they create a dense kind of understory. Hedgehogs love that. They also obviously they like inverts. So any plants that's going to attract our kind of natural inverts will be great. Ragwort will attract cinnabar moth caterpillars. There's loads of our wildflowers that will attract certain amounts of caterpillars and moths and things like that. And they're a great food source for hedgehogs. They also, as I mentioned, they love crane fly larvae. So that tends to
Mhm.
be found in grass. So even that, you can, if you've got a pond, that will attract a lot of inverts in, and you'll be surprised at how many animals will come to your garden just with the source of water. So really things like that, just increasing that structural diversity. If you can plant natural wildflowers, anything that's going to create a kind of nice dense canopy, anything that's got lots of strong flowers on it, that would be perfect.
That's great. Yeah, I'm a herpetologist, and I couldn't agree more with the pond comment that I think people are always surprised when they put a pond in and newts start showing up in frog spawn, and yeah,
Yeah, it's
really attracts a lot.
amazing. It really is amazing, but you it seems kind of silly to say it. It seems too obvious, but like if your garden's got water in it and maybe yours is the one in five gardens that has water in it, like yours is going to be so much more valuable than any of the other areas. I mean, think back to summer when we had those droughts, like every animal will be coming to your garden for their water, like whether they're big or small, whether they're inverts or mammals. So
Yeah,
it's just so integral to enhance our biodiversity.
definitely. Great. Well, we've got more questions if you're up for it. Isabel Whitfield has made a comment here with some questions. You didn't mention IIRC to not feed hedgehogs bread and milk. Do people still do this? Is it still bad?
Yeah, so it is still bad. I think people have kind of got the message now that we don't feed them that. So it used to be back in the kind of between the 50s and the 80s, maybe. Feeding them bread and milk was quite a common, like people were told, oh, there's a hedgehog in your garden, put out a saucer of milk. For some reason, it was just the kind of common advice. But we know now that they're lactose intolerant. And obviously, we know as an insectivorous species that bread is going to be no good for them. It's just the same as us eating chips every day. So the thing is, they will eat it if you put it out, but it's the same as us eating chocolate and
Yeah.
biscuits. Like it's not good for us. We'll eat it, but it's not good for us. So yeah, definitely don't feed them those things. We haven't had anyone in who's participating in our citizen science project feeding them those things, which is good. The advice all the way across from all the kind of hedgehog conservation and care platforms is not to feed them that. The common advice at the moment is to feed meaty cat food. So that's, I think, what most people feed them, and certainly from the people taking part in our citizen science project, most people are feeding them a kind of a pet food instead.
Cool. Thanks. Claudia has asked, do you have any experience with wildlife tunnels? In other words, small tunnels under the roads. And do hedgehogs use them?
So I don't have any personal experience with this, but some of my colleagues who are also studying hedgehogs and a whole suite of other animals have actually seen that tunnels will be used by hedgehogs. They're used by badgers, they're used by all kinds of mammals. But yes, so under road tunnels will provide a little corridor for hedgehogs. So we've got research showing that they will use them. We can try and help to push legislation to encourage the use of these things around roads as well to help avoid roadkill.
Cool. We've got more. Anna has said, my neighbor has astroturf. Is there anything I should do to encourage hedgehogs to still access my normal garden?
Yeah, I would definitely suggest encouraging them into your garden. The problem with AstroTurf is it's plastic. So we've actually seen through research that hedgehogs can be some of the most badly affected mammals for plastic burdens. One of my colleagues, she found that hedgehogs had more microplastics in their bodies than any of the other mammals that she studied. So really, if there's a garden next to you that's really unappealing, maybe that's even more motivation to make yours the best you can. Because then, if they're in the area, they're going to come to yours rather than that kind of area, which they're likely to kind of, there's not much for them there. And also, they could be unintentionally harming themselves down the line through kind of accumulation of microplastics in their bodies.
Hmm, thanks. Okay, we've got a two-part question coming up next. I'll give you the first one. Okay, have all your volunteer engagement efforts been via social media? And if so, have you actively sought out local wildlife groups, etc., or was it a case of posting your project info and waiting for volunteers to find your page?
So it's been a mix. A lot of stuff I post on social media just to try and get the word out there and to try and get it seen across as many platforms as possible. I'll try and post in hedgehog groups, local groups, and things like that. I try and stay relatively active in my local area. So I live in Tring, which is in Hertfordshire, but I've been to a couple of talks which I've done in and around the Reading area. I've done a few talks in the Oxford area, so I'll try and get involved with mammal groups who are working in other areas close by and get the word spread across to people there. We also go to little green events. I've done a couple of stalls and things like that, so I'll be talking to people at stalls and we have some kind of bits that we sell as well that helps to support the project, and I'll answer anyone's questions there. We basically are just trying to get the word out to as many people. So it's mainly on the social media. I am trying to be more active with our local kind of wildlife groups. I've done talks at the Mammal Society conference. The People's Trust for Endangered Species are aware of our project and have been sharing it with their subscription base. The British Hedgehog Preservation Society, again, they're aware of our project and have been sharing it and keeping up to date with our findings. So basically, I'm just trying to get us the word out there in as many avenues as possible. It's quite tricky when you're doing a PhD because you're kind of balancing multiple pieces of research at once, and I do
Hmm,
a
yeah,
lot of lab-based research as well. But I'm just trying to get as many people to see it as possible. So yeah, it's really we try and stay as active as possible on social media, and then also we'll talk to larger charities and NGOs and get them to help us to share things.
great, thanks. We were just up in Tring yesterday. Yeah, you
Oh,
live in an
really?
awesome part of the country. Very nice. Yeah, with the Natural History Museum has well, I'm sure you know the
Yeah.
Rothschild building and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really
Uh,
lovely over here.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I enjoy every visit. So the second part of that question was, have you noticed any interactions with badgers? I have heard anecdotally that increases in badger numbers have led to reductions in hogs on a local level.
Yeah, so with badgers, my personal opinion is it's a lot of scaremongering. At the moment, the government aren't really too favorable on badgers at the moment. They like to blame them for a lot of things to do with cattle and bovine tuberculosis and all things like that. research has actually shown that badgers are not the issue in that equation. It's kind of a similar situation when it comes to hedgehog conservation. Now, badgers can predate hedgehogs, but they tend not to, especially in urban areas. Badgers' main source of food is worms. They'll eat 300 worms in a night. And because of that, they like to
Wow.
live near an arable location where they can turn over large amounts of turf and they can get 300 worms a night. Now, if you come into an urban location, you're really unlikely to get 300 worms in a little terrace garden. So a lot of the time, badgers don't come into towns and cities for that reason. They can't access their main source of prey. We have heard some anecdotal tales of badgers predating hedgehogs in those urban situations. So it might be a case of that badger then is kind of strapped for a meal. It doesn't have access to what it would usually eat, and then it's making a choice that it wouldn't have to make. Some of our research from other parts of the country has shown that actually there are areas where um, badgers and hedgehogs don't go. So it's not just the fact that the badgers are there. There are areas of the rural environment where hedgehogs don't go, but there are no badgers there. So it's not the badgers keeping them out, it's something else which is making it unattractive. So really, badgers are not a big issue as they're made out to be. I mean, in the 16 months that I was collecting data that I've put into this, we didn't have a single badger in a garden, let alone in a garden at the same time as a hedgehog.
Yeah.
I've just had, so since 2023, this is the first time I've had a badger and a hedgehog in a garden at the same time. And that person said that there's no problems as well. So, I think it's a case that people like to blame someone other than themselves for reasons why other species are in decline. But realistically, the reason why hedgehogs are in decline is because of humans. Like they existed on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years before humans started kind of putting up boundaries and chopping down things. So the issue is humans, and we don't want to accept that it's us. So pointing the finger at the big bad badger is the next best thing. But really, they're not high up on there. Many more hedgehogs end up in wildlife rehabs from dog attacks than they are getting attacked by badgers in an urban environment.
Great, thank you. And we've got some natural history questions for you around hedgehog biology here. So David
Okay.
has asked, how long in years does a hog live?
Ah, yeah, so that's a nice one again. So in the wild, usually they'd live to about 3 years old. Um, Males tend to die a little bit earlier than females. This is usually because they will roam in search of females, so they'll travel a lot more. So they tend to be hit by cars a lot more. So if you're a male hedgehog, 3 years is about it for you. Females can live slightly longer. They might live up to 5 years in the wild, but really, we don't tend to see them past that age in the wild. There have been some reported that have been older than that, but they tend to get quite ratty. Um, they'll start to look quite haggard, and they don't really fare very well after kind of the 5 year range. In captivity, we've had some living up to that age as well, and we have actually had some research that was done in Denmark, where one of my colleagues, she did she aged them by rings in their jaw, and she believed to have found one that was up to 16 years old. I'd take that with a pinch of salt, but they can live over that kind of 3 to 5 year age. They don't tend to though.
Great, thanks. And then another biology question from David. It's like about kind of home range size. Do they have a set territory?
No, so not really. Or I mean, in a natural environment, they wouldn't have a territory. So they'll tend to roam. I mean, again, the females will stay closer to home. They might roam less, but the males can go up to 5 kilometers a night. And we have had some studies done where they've actually put GPS trackers on them, and they've seen that males will roam between villages along the kind of roads and things like that. So they'll actually keep the genetics going in a kind of village situation because they'll be traveling between. the population. So they don't tend to defend a territory, but they'll have what we call a home range. So it's like an area that they tend to go that's not defended by them.
That's great. And I'm jumping ahead in the list here, but you've just answered exactly Mark Pritchard's question about whether any geo-tracking has been done and if we know about their specific movement. So that's great. You got two questions done there. Excellent.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
Next up, we've got just a comment for you. What a fascinating, highly informative presentation. Thank you so much. This is excellent. I
Oh,
agree.
thank you.
And Sarah has asked next, you mentioned you have lots more data to analyze. What questions are you keen to answer in the coming year?
So, I mean, all the data. So, I really want to look at those points that I highlighted about their change in behavior. Like, are they changing their behavior? Are they responding differently in an urban environment? Um, because there are different characteristics that go along with urban environments that we see in other animals. We see things like they're less fearful of humans. They come in greater numbers, things like that, and they'll respond differently to humans. These kind of suite of different behaviors are something we call domestication syndrome. So, like our foxes, for example, a lot of our foxes, they'll come, they'll hang out with humans, they'll move in our spaces. They're utilizing our spaces, they're taking advantage of it. And in a sense, they're becoming less fearful from humans, that they're utilizing what we can offer them. So, in a way, they're becoming more domestic-like. And I'm wondering if hedgehogs are becoming more domesticated in this way. So they're utilizing our spaces already. They are interacting differently than they would normally, and they're taking advantage of us just the same as other domestic species would. Um, so really, it's kind of looking at these behaviors and seeing if that could be an indication of those kind of adaptations going forwards. Also, I mean, I've been really keenly following the quality and content of hedgehog foods, and I will have some research coming out very soon next year on the kind of the nutritional quality, on what's good, what's bad, like is it comparable to their natural diet? What is their natural diet made of? Like what are the elements in their natural diet? How can we replicate this? So I'm trying to answer those kind of questions, like yeah. What is the best kind of nutrients that we can offer them? And can we replicate this so that people can provide food for them in a safe way? And also, yeah, how are their behaviors changing and how is this going to affect them down the line?
That's great. And we're getting close to the end here, but I had one question that I really wanted to ask, which was, and apologies if I missed this in your presentation, but I was just curious about the geographic extent of your research. Have you been looking mostly in a particular region, or are you looking more broadly? You mentioned some collaborators in Europe, but just yeah, the geographic extent.
So at the moment, the Hogs on Film project is just UK based. So we've got participants kind of all up and down the country, but they're quite
Yeah.
scattered at the moment. So because the way that I've probably been promoting it is on social media, so sometimes we'll have certain little flurries of people joining in a certain location. Like we'll suddenly have five people in Kent start joining the project
Yeah.
because someone's talked about it at a talk or something, or someone shared something in their local environment. So we've got participants from all the way down south up until Newcastle. We've got participants, but the amount of participants we have are really quite scattered. So what I want to do really this kind of next year and moving on from this is all those little populations of participants, grow them, get more, get better coverage. Um, there are so many people filming and feeding them. There's literally thousands of people
Wow.
every night who set up cameras. So unless we capture that data that they're generating, it's getting lost. And like, so it's just a really great opportunity to get widespread data that covers the whole kind of geographic range of our hedgehogs. And then we can look at things like, um, is there a north-south divide? Do they come out of hibernation slightly later in the north compared to the south, for example? If we've got a drought down in the south, how do they respond? Are they visiting our gardens more frequently for water or not? And yeah, we can start to look at those interesting things, in a more built-up city, how is their behavior differing to a village location? So really, the aim is to get more people involved, as many people involved as possible, across the whole kind of range, so that we can start looking at those little interesting little things that could be to do with their regional location.
Cool, that's brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We're now at 1:30, so I'm going to wrap things up here. You still have lots of questions that we didn't manage to get to. So, Leah, would you be happy for people to contact you with these questions?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Anyone can get hold of me through social media or our email address there, hogsonfilm@gmail.com. I'm if you email or you contact any of those, it'll be me who responds. I am Hogs on Film, so I say we, but it's just me at the moment. So if you just send me across any of your messages, I'm happy to help.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you again so much for a wonderful talk. I think the large number of questions we have are great evidence that everybody really enjoyed it, and it was a great talk. And
Amazing.
thank you all to the audience that joined us. Please do check out the Linsock website for future events in our What's On section. And I think with that, I'll just wish everybody a happy day and hope the rest of it's great.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.